The desert spoke in whispers that afternoon when threading through sage, wagon wheels groaning against stone, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Clara Boone kept her eyes on the horizon, where red mesas rose like ancient sentinels against the copper sky. 3 days out from Tucson, 2 more to Fort Avery, and the medicine wagon she rode with carried enough supplies to last the garrison through winter. She adjusted her dust-covered bonnet, feeling the familiar weight of her medical bag beside her. 26 years old, widowed 2 winters past when fever took her husband in California. She'd learned that grief traveled lighter when your hands stayed busy healing others. The advertisement for a medical assistant at Fort Avery had seemed like providence, or at least a practical escape from memories. Road narrows ahead. Miguel Torres called from his position beside the lead wagon. The farrier's voice carried that particular note of caution she'd learned to trust over their journey. Half Mexican, quarter Tarahumara, quarter mystery, as he liked to say. Miguel had been fixing shoes and wheels for the convoy since Tucson. His knowledge of the territory ran deeper than maps could show. The convoy consisted of 3 wagons, medical supplies in Clara's wagon, provisions in the second, ammunition in the third. 6 guards rode escort boys mostly, fresh from eastern cities, sweating through their wool uniforms. Their sergeant, a man named Holloway, kept scanning the ridge lines with field glasses that caught the sun like signal mirrors. "Something wrong?" Clara asked Miguel when he dropped back to check her wagon's wheels. His weathered hands tested the spokes with practiced efficiency. "Apache signed this morning. Fresh tracks crossing the old wash." "How many?" "Enough." He straightened, dark eyes meeting hers. "They know we're here." The attack, when it came, wasn't what the guards expected. No war cries, no thunder of hooves. Just the sudden crack of rifles from the rocks, bullets striking dirt in measured patterns ahead of the horses, behind them, precise as fence posts marking a line that said stop. The lead horses reared. Holloway shouted orders that made no sense. The young guards raised their rifles at shadows, at dust, at nothing. Then the warriors appeared. They materialized from the landscape like the land itself had taken human form, perhaps 20 men. Faces painted with white clay and charcoal, rifles held with casual competence. They moved down from the rocks without hurry, knowing the convoy was already theirs. Clara's hands found her medical bag by instinct, though she knew no bandage could help here. Miguel stepped closer to her wagon, his hand moving slow and visible to his belt knife, not to draw it, but to show he had it, wouldn't use it unless forced. The warriors circled them with the patience of men who owned time itself. One of them, younger than the rest, shot the front wheel of the lead wagon. The wood splintered. The wagon listed sideways like a broken-legged horse. Another warrior collected the guards' rifles with almost gentle efficiency, like a teacher taking dangerous toys from children. Then he came. The warriors parted for him without signal or word. He rode a paint horse, its markings like shadows on snow. Everything about him spoke of authority, held in reserve, the straightness of his back, the economy of his movements, the way other warriors' eyes tracked to him for guidance. He wore his hair long and loose, except for a single eagle feather, and when he dismounted, even the wind seemed to quiet. "I am Hashke Naba," he said in English carved by accent but clear as struck flint. "This road crosses sacred ground. The bones of our grandfathers lie in the valley beyond." His gaze moved across the convoy, stopping at Holloway. "Your Iron Road Company has disturbed 2 graves, taken what was buried with the dead." Holloway's face flushed red beneath sunburn. "We're military supply, not railroad. You've got no cause." The rifle butt struck him down before he could finish, not from Hashke, but from one of his warriors. Hashke didn't even glance at the fallen sergeant. "The railroad pays you for protection. This makes you the same." His attention shifted to Clara, and she felt the weight of it like noon sun. "You are the medicine woman." "I'm a nurse," Clara said, surprised her voice came steady. "You will carry a message." He moved toward her wagon with that same unhurried purpose. Miguel stepped between them, not aggressive, just there, a quiet statement of position. Hashke studied him with interest. "You speak our language," Hashke said in Spanish. "Some," Miguel replied in the same tongue. "Enough to know respect, but not enough to know sense." Hashke drew his knife in one fluid motion, not a threat, but a demonstration. The blade was old, possibly Spanish steel, its edge catching light like water. He pressed it against Miguel's throat, gentle as a razor for shaving, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "I'll carry your message," Clara said quickly. "Yes," Hashke agreed. "You will." The knife hadn't moved. A bead of blood appeared on Miguel's neck, small as a pinprick. But first, you must understand its weight. The desert held its breath. Even the wounded Holloway stopped groaning. The young guard stood frozen, hands empty, eyes wide. This was the moment Clara had read about in newspaper accounts back east, the moment before massacre, before scalping, before all the horrors that sold papers and fueled nightmares. But Hashke pulled the blade away, leaving only that single drop of blood as signature. "Tonight, I spare you," he said. And now he spoke directly to Clara, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony. "But my condition will haunt you forever." "What condition?" He reached into a leather pouch at his belt, withdrawing something wrapped in red cloth. When he unfolded it, Clara saw it was a piece of pottery, ancient-looking, with symbols she couldn't read. "This was taken from my grandfather's grave. There is another piece, taken from my grandmother's. The railroad company has them in their office at Fort Avery, along with survey maps for the Sacred Valley." He rewrapped the pottery, placed it in Clara's hands. Her fingers closed around it automatically. "You will go to the fort. You will go to the railroad office. You will tell them this. Return what was taken. Stop the surveys through the valley. Do this within 1 moon cycle. And if they refuse..." Hashke's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him, like heat shimmer over stone. "Then the road will learn what the desert has always known, that some boundaries are written in blood." He turned to his warriors, spoke in Apache. They began taking supplies from the wagons, not everything, but enough to matter. Food, ammunition, medical supplies. Clara started forward when they reached for the medicine chest. "Those are for the fort's hospital." Hashke held up a hand. She stopped. "My people also have wounded. Your medicine will heal them instead." He watched her face carefully. "This troubles you." Clara felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on her. The smart answer, the safe answer, was silence. But something in Hashke's manner suggested he was taking her measure, that her response mattered beyond the moment. "Healing is healing," she said finally. "Whoever needs it." Something flickered in his expression, approval, perhaps, or surprise. He spoke again to his warriors. They took less than they might have, leaving the basic surgical supplies and quinine. "You," Hashke pointed to Miguel, "you will remember everything, every word. Be her witness." "I will," Miguel said simply. Hashke mounted his paint horse with the same fluid grace he'd shown throughout. The other warriors were already fading back into the landscape, becoming shadows again, part of the red rock and thorned ocotillo. "1 moon," he called to Clara. "The condition is not just to carry words. It is to live by them, to stand between two peoples who would rather stand apart. This weight," he gestured to the pottery shard in her hands, "will grow heavier each day you carry it. By the end, you will understand." Then he was gone, and the desert swallowed them all as if they'd never been. Only the broken wagon wheel, the missing supplies, and the shard in Clara's hands proved it hadn't been a dream. Holloway struggled to his feet, face twisted with rage and humiliation. "Savages! We'll see them hang for this." Clara looked at the pottery in her hands, feeling its strange warmth, the weight of ancient clay and modern consequence. "Help me fix this wheel," Miguel said quietly to anyone who would listen. "We need to reach the fort." As the men worked, Clara stood apart, watching the sun sink toward the mesas. The desert was speaking again in its whispered tongue, wind and distance and time. But now she heard something else in it, a voice that would follow her. She suspected, for the rest of her days. The condition is not just to carry words. It is to live by them. The rope cut into Clara's wrists, though not cruelly tight, just enough to remind her she was captive. They hadn't taken her immediately. After Hashke's departure, the convoy had limped another mile before more warriors appeared, silent as shadows at dusk. This time, they wanted only her. "The woman comes," the lead warrior had said in broken English. "The test is not finished." Miguel had tried to intervene, but Clara stopped him with a look. Something in Hashke's words echoed about living by the condition, not just carrying it. Perhaps this was part of that weight. Now she stood at the edge of their temporary camp, positioned where the morning sun would find her first and linger longest. The pottery shard remained in her pocket, pressing against her hip like a stone conscience. No water since dawn, no shade, no food, just the slow crawl of sun across sky and the quiet movements of the Apache camp 30 yards away. She watched them. These people newspaper accounts called savage, a grandmother teaching a young girl to grind corn between stones, the rhythm hypnotic and ancient. 2 boys, perhaps 8 years old, practicing with small bows, their concentration complete. An old man repairing a rifle with the same patience Miguel showed with horseshoes. The sun climbed higher. Sweat dried to salt on her skin. Her tongue thickened. Her shadow shrank to a small pool at her feet. A warrior passed close, carrying water. He didn't look at her, but he slowed, letting drops fall from the gourd onto the packed earth near her feet. The wet earth smell rose like memory of rain. Clara closed her eyes, breathed it in, said nothing. By afternoon, her legs trembled. The rope allowed her to sit but not lie down. She lowered herself carefully, dress pooling in the dust. The camp continued its quiet business mending, cooking, talking in voices too low to carry. Sometimes children would drift closer, studying her with frank curiosity before mothers called them back. The sun was brutal now, a weight on her skull. Clara had seen men die of sun sickness, knew the signs, the dancing spots in vision, the strange cold that came before collapse. She focused on breathing, on the pottery shard's weight, on staying conscious. Then the old woman came. She moved with the careful dignity of age, carrying a small gourd. Without word or ceremony, she lifted it to Clara's lips. The water was warm, slightly bitter with mineral taste. But Clara had never tasted anything finer. Just 3 swallows, the woman pulled it away before Clara's thirst was satisfied. "You carry the old piece," the woman said in surprisingly clear English. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The woman's fingers, twisted with age but still nimble, touched Clara's pocket where the shard rested. "My husband's mother made that pot, long time dead now." Her hands shaped that clay like she shaped her children with strength, with purpose. She studied Clara's face with eyes that had seen decades of desert seasons. "You think this is torture, what Hashke does, making you stand in sun. Isn't it?" A sound that might have been laughter, dry as wind through grass. "Child, if we wanted you to suffer, you would know. This is teaching. The sun teaches patience. Thirst teaches value. Watching us teaches truth." "What truth?" The old woman gestured to the camp. "That we are people. Not devils from your newspapers, not angels from romantic stories. People, with children who play and elders who ache and young ones who fall in love at the wrong time." Her eyes crinkled. "Just like your people." A young boy ran up, spoke rapid Apache. The old woman listened, nodded, turned back to Clara. "Hashke returns. Your test moves to new ground." She produced a small knife, cut Clara's bonds with one smooth motion. "You are nurse. Yes, you will show this." Clara rubbed her wrists, pins and needles flooding back into her hands. "Someone's hurt." "Come." They led her to a shelter made of bent saplings and hide. Inside, A young warrior lay on a blanket, his breathing shallow and quick. A wooden splinter thick as Clara's thumb jutted from his side, just below the ribs. The wound wept clear fluid and blood in equal measure. "From the wagon wheel," the old woman explained. "When it broke." Clara's training took over. "I need my medical bag." "No, you use what we have." Clara looked around the shelter. A pot of boiling water. Clean cloth that might have been torn from traded calico. A knife blade heating in coals. Basic, but workable. "Hold him," she said to the two warriors who'd appeared at the shelter's entrance. They didn't move. "If you want him to live, hold him still." They looked past her. Hashke stood in the doorway, his shadow falling across the injured man. "Do as she says," he commanded. Clara cleaned her hands with the boiling water, hissing at the heat. The wound was bad, but not fatal if she could remove the splinter without driving it deeper. If infection didn't set, if luck held... "What's his name?" she asked as she examined the wound more closely. "Why does it matter?" Hashke's voice was neutral. "Because he's not a wound. He's a person. The person often fights harder than the wound gives up. His name is Nayeli. He is my sister's son." Clara met Hashke's eyes. "Then you should talk to him. Keep his mind here while I work." She didn't wait for agreement, just began. The splinter had entered at an angle, missing the vital organs but deep enough to be dangerous. She gripped it carefully, feeling for the grain of the wood, the path of entry. Hashke spoke in Apache, his voice low and steady. A story, perhaps, or a prayer. The young man's eyes fixed on his uncle's face as Clara worked. The splinter came free in one piece, followed by a rush of blood. Clara pressed cloth to the wound, hard, counting heartbeats. The bleeding slowed. She cleaned the wound with the boiled water, packed it with clean cloth. "He needs to stay still for 2 days minimum. The wound should be cleaned and repacked twice a day. Watch for fever, for red streaks spreading from the wound, for delirium." She looked at the old woman. "You have willow bark." "We know medicines." "Good. Use them." Clara stood, legs unsteady after hours in the sun and the intensity of the procedure. Hashke studied his nephew, then her. "You could have let him die. Revenge for holding you." "That's not revenge. That's waste." Clara wiped her bloody hands on a spare cloth. "And I told you, healing is healing." The camp had gone quiet. Warriors and women alike had gathered outside the shelter, watching. Hashke said something in Apache. The crowd dispersed, but their glances back held something different now, not quite acceptance, but assessment. As the sun set, they brought Clara to a different spot, still under guard, but with shade, water, a blanket. Miguel's saddlebags were there, the ones with her personal items. "Tomorrow you return to your people," Hashke said. "The test is finished." "Did I pass?" He almost smiled, a slight movement at the corner of his mouth. "You did not fail." That night, Clara sat by their fire, not as prisoner, but not as guest. Something between. The old woman brought her corn mush and dried meat. Children crept closer, no longer called back. One brave girl touched Clara's yellow hair, giggling when Clara smiled at her. She watched their evening rituals, the careful banking of fires, the soft songs mothers sang to babies, the young couples who found reasons to walk past each other, the old men discussing something serious in low voices, occasionally glancing at the moon. "They debate whether the railroad will listen," the old woman translated, settling beside Clara. "Some say words are wind, some say blood speaks louder. Hashke believes there is another way." "What way?" "You, standing between, making each side see the other as human." The old woman pulled her blanket closer. "It is a dangerous place to stand." "I'm beginning to understand that." Dawn came with ceremony. Hashke cut a piece of leather from his own shirt, wrapped it around Clara's wrist where the rope had left marks. "This stays until the moon completes its cycle," he said. "When men at your fort see it, they will ask. You will tell them how you got it. You will make them understand that we are not shadows to be swept away, but people with names, with wounds that bleed same as theirs." He helped her mount a spare horse, handed her the reins. Miguel was waiting at the agreed spot, his relief visible even at distance. "The condition," Hashke said, his hand on the horse's neck. "It begins now. Not the words anyone can carry words, but to live between two peoples, to make each see the other truly. This is the weight you carry. Every choice you make from now until moon's end. Ask yourself, does this honor the condition or betray it?" Clara touched the leather band on her wrist, the pottery shard in her pocket. "I understand." "No," Hashke said quietly. "Not yet, but you begin to—" He stepped back, and the horse carried her toward Miguel, toward Fort Avery, toward whatever weight awaited. Behind her, the Apache camp was already fading into the landscape, becoming one with stone and shadow again. But the leather on her wrist remained, warm as a second pulse, heavy as a promise made in blood and sunrise. Fort Avery squatted on the desert like a collection of wooden boxes dropped by a careless giant. The walls were more suggestion than fortification, the buildings weathered gray despite their recent construction. Clara had expected relief at seeing it. Instead, the leather band on her wrist seemed to tighten. Captain Silas Greer stood waiting at the gates, his uniform crisp despite the heat. Beside him, a man in a city suit wilted visibly. Edmund Pike, she guessed, from the Continental and Spur Railroad Company. Their presence at the gates meant word had traveled ahead. "Mrs. Boone." Greer's voice carried the particular tone of authority that expected immediate obedience. "You'll report to headquarters immediately." "She needs water and rest," Miguel said from his horse. Greer's eyes flicked to him with dismissal. "The Mexican can tend his horses. Mrs. Boone has explaining to do." Clara dismounted, legs stiff from riding. "Mr. Torres was witness to everything. He should—" "I decide who should and shouldn't. Mrs. Boone." Greer's hand rested on his sidearm, casual but intentional. "Sergeant Holloway's report was disturbing." The headquarters was stifling, windows shut against dust but trapping heat like an oven. Greer sat behind his desk. Pike took the chair beside him. They left Clara standing. $20,000 of supplies. Pike began without preamble. "Stolen by savages you claim gave you a message." "Not claim. They did give." "Why are you alive?" Greer interrupted. "Holloway says they held you overnight. Apache don't leave witnesses, especially not women." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt heat rise in her face, not embarrassment, but anger. "I treated one of their wounded. They kept me to ensure he survived the night." "Convenient." Pike's smile was thin as paper. "And this message—" Clara pulled the pottery shard from her pocket, set it on the desk. Both men leaned away as if it might explode. "They want two things: returned artifacts taken from graves. And they want the railroad to stop surveying through the sacred valley. 1 month to comply." Pike laughed, sharp and brief. "Artifacts? You mean some old pots we found during excavation? They're already shipped east to museums. As for the valley, that's the shortest route to Prescott. Rerouting would cost millions." "Then war will cost more," Clara said quietly. Greer stood, the chair scraping like fingernails on slate. "Are you threatening the United States Army, Mrs. Boone?" "I'm delivering a message." "From savages who tortured you." He grabbed her wrist, where the leather band circled. "What's this, some heathen marking?" Clara didn't pull away. "It's a reminder." "Of what?" "That they're people, with names, with families, with sacred places they'll die to protect." Greer released her wrist as if it burned. "You've been influenced, perhaps threatened in ways you won't admit." A knock interrupted. The door opened to reveal Lieutenant Ira Bell. a man whose careful eyes missed nothing. "Sir, the medical supplies have been inventoried. We're short critical items, morphine, surgical instruments, quinine." "The Apache took them," Clara said, "for their own wounded." "They're wounded," Greer's voice rose. "You mean the ones wounded attacking us?" "No, one was injured when you shot our wagon wheel. Flying splinters." Silence stretched taut. Bell's expression shifted slightly interest, perhaps, or recognition of something significant. "Dismissed, Lieutenant." Greer snapped. Bell left, but not before his eyes met Clara's, a brief connection. A question asked and filed away. Pike stood, brushing imaginary dust from his suit. "Mrs. Boone, you seem to be under the misapprehension that we negotiate with hostiles. The railroad goes where it's planned. The Army protects it. That's civilization." "And the graves they disturbed?" "Bones in the ground. Nothing more." He moved to the door. "Captain, I trust you'll handle this appropriately. The woman is clearly sympathetic to the enemy. Perhaps she shouldn't have access to medical supplies that might find their way to the wrong hands." After he left, Greer circled Clara slowly. "He's right, about sympathies. Holloway says the Mexicans spoke to them in their language. Mr. Torres spoke Spanish. Some Apache know it from trading." "Mr. Torres." Greer's tone made the name sound like an accusation. "Interesting company you keep. A half-breed drifter who knows Apache ways, who just happened to be with your convoy. He was hired in Tucson. Check the records." "Oh, I will." He returned to his desk. "You're confined to quarters until I decide what to do with you. The medical supplies are now under military control. You'll assist only under supervision." Clara turned to leave, then stopped. "Captain, what happened to the previous medical officer here, the one I'm replacing?" "He requested transfer, said the desert was making him see things that weren't there." Greer's smile was cold. "Weak minds break out here. Mrs. Boone, remember that." Her quarters were a single room behind the infirmary, hot as a furnace and barely large enough for a cot and washstand. Clara sat on the thin mattress, holding the pottery shard. Through the small window, she could see soldiers drilling in the courtyard, raising dust that turned the sunset red as blood. A soft knock. She opened the door to find Miguel, hat in hand. "They let you in." "I shoe their horses. That makes me useful enough." He glanced down the hallway, then stepped inside, closing the door. "Are you hurt?" "No." She showed him the leather band. "But I'm marked now. In their eyes, I'm compromised." Miguel's rough fingers touched the leather gently. "In Apache way, this is honor mark, means you stood the test." "It means I'm caught between two sides that want war." "No, some want war, others want survival. Question is, which voices get heard?" He pulled something from his pocket, a small wrapped bundle. Inside was bread, dried meat, an apple. "Thought you might be hungry." They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, sharing the meal in comfortable silence. Through the thin walls came the sounds of Fort Life boots on boards, distant laughter from the enlisted men's quarters, a harmonica playing something mournful. "They'll watch you now," Miguel said finally. "Pike especially. He's got contracts worth fortunes." "And Greer wants glory. Apache war would mean promotion, maybe a post back east." Miguel's expression darkened. "Bell is different. Lost friends in an ambush 2 years ago, but also lost friends to bad orders. He thinks before he shoots." "You've been asking around." "Listening. It's different." He stood, helped her up. "There's a woman runs the boarding house in town, Martha Jessup. Her husband died building railroad bridges. She's got no love for Pike's company. Might be good to know her." After he left, Clara lay on the narrow cot, watching shadows deepen on the ceiling. Somewhere in the desert, Hashke's people were watching the same stars emerge. His nephew Nayeli was either healing or dying. The old woman was perhaps telling stories to the children about the yellow-haired woman who stood in the sun. Another knock, firmer. Lieutenant Bell entered with a medical inventory ledger. "Captain wants you to verify what's missing," he said formally. Then, quieter. "I was at Sand Creek saw what was left." Clara understood. Sand Creek, the massacre disguised as battle, where soldiers had slaughtered a peaceful Cheyenne camp. "These Apache," Bell continued, marking the ledger. "They could have killed you all. Why didn't they?" "Because they wanted us to hear them, really hear them." Bell nodded slowly. "The pottery they mentioned, I saw Pike's men loading crates 2 weeks ago. Heard them joking about grave robbing for science. Would you testify to that? To what end Pike owns half the territorial government? Greer wants his eagles." He paused at the door. "But I'll remember what I saw. Sometimes memory matters more than testimony." That night, Clara was summoned to treat a private who'd collapsed during drill. Dehydration and exhaustion easy to treat but potentially fatal if ignored. As she worked, she heard soldiers talking. "Railroads hiring guns, offering double army pay." "For what?" "Protection detail. Pike says Apache are planning something big." "How's he know that?" "Don't matter. Money's good." Clara finished with the private, but the conversation echoed. Pike wasn't waiting for war, he was building toward it. Hiring men whose loyalty could be bought, whose actions wouldn't be constrained by military law. She returned to her quarters to find a note slipped under the door. No signature, but she recognized Martha Jessup's mentioned name at the bottom. "Tomorrow, noon, behind the boarding house. Truth needs witnesses." Clara held the note to her lamp, watched it burn to ash. Outside, a coyote howled, and others answered, their voices threading through the darkness like warning. The leather band on her wrist felt warm, alive, carrying the weight of promise made in desert sun. 1 month, Hashke had said. 3 days were already gone. The boarding house kitchen smelled of lye soap and baking bread. Martha Jessup stood at the stove, her back straight despite her 50-odd years, gray hair pinned severely. She didn't turn when Clara entered through the back door. "You're the nurse who talks to Apache," Martha said, testing the bread with a practiced finger. "I delivered a message." "Same thing in this town." Martha finally turned. Her face bore the particular weathering of frontier widowhood strength carved by loss. "Coffee." They sat at the worn pine table. Through the window, Clara could see Pike's office across the street, its windows dark despite the midday sun. "My William died 3 years ago," Martha began without preamble. "Bridge collapse on the Continental and Spur line. Company said it was act of God, but Billy Brennan, he worked with William. He said the timber was rotten. Pike knew. Cheaper to risk it than replace it." "I'm sorry." "Don't want sorry. Want truth spoken." Martha's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Pike's been spreading tales. Says Apache stole medicine meant for children. Says they tortured you, working folks into a lather." "None of that's true." "I know. Miguel told me different. But Pike's version sells newspapers. And newspapers sell fear. And fear sells protection." She stood, went to a cupboard, pulled out a leather journal. Billy Brennan kept records. Every shortcut, every bribe, every corner cut. He was going to the territorial governor, but he died 2 weeks ago. Snakebite, they said. "You don't believe it?" "Billy knew snakes like he knew timber with respect and distance." Martha pushed the journal across the table. "There's more. Pike's been paying prospectors to dig in the Sacred Valley. Not for gold for bones. Selling them to museums back east. Specimens, he calls them." Clara felt the pottery shard heavy in her pocket. "Hashke's grandparents. And others, 12 graves at least." Martha's voice dropped. "There's worse. Pike hired guns from Texas, men with reputations. They're planning something. Billy heard them talking before he died. They aim to hit an Apache camp. Make it look like the Apache struck first. When? Soon. They need an incident before the month is out, before the Apache deadline. The kitchen door banged open. Edmund Pike stood there, 2 hired guns flanking him. His suit was pristine despite the heat, his smile sharp as glass. Ladies discussing recipes. My kitchen's private, Mr. Pike, Martha said steadily. Nothing's private that concerns railroad security. His gaze fixed on Clara. Mrs. Boone, you've been busy meeting with known agitators. Mrs. Jessup runs a respectable... Mrs. Jessup spread sedition. Pike stepped inside, his men following. And you, Mrs. Boone, are either naive or complicit. Which is it? Clara stood, matching his stare. I'm a nurse trying to prevent bloodshed. By consorting with enemies of progress. Pike pulled out a folded paper. Telegram from Tucson. Interesting reading about your late husband. Died of fever. Yes, but after defending Chinese railroad workers from vigilantes. Seems you have a history of choosing the wrong side. The words hit like a slap. Thomas's death was sacred ground, private grief. My husband stood for what was right. And look where it got him. Pike's voice softened to mock sympathy. Don't make his mistake. Mrs. Boone, the Apache are finished. It's merely a question of how many die in the process. One of his guns, a scarred man with dead eyes, spoke up. Found something interesting, boss. He held up Billy Brennan's journal. Martha lunged for it, but the second gun caught her arm, twisted it behind her back. She cried out. Stop! Clara moved toward Martha, but Pike blocked her. Theft of company property is serious. He flipped through the journal. Poor Billy. Always writing things down. Shame about that snake. You killed him. Martha gasped through pain. Prove it. Pike tossed the journal to his man. Burn it. No. Martha struggled harder. The scarred man produced a match. Clara acted without thinking, throwing her coffee at his face. He cursed, dropped the journal. Clara dove for it, but Pike's boot caught her ribs, sent her sprawling. Now that was foolish. Pike stood over her as she gasped for breath. Assaulting railroad security, that's prison time. In front of witnesses, Miguel's voice came from the doorway. Behind him stood Lieutenant Bell and 3 soldiers. Pike's demeanor shifted instantly. Lieutenant, we were just recovering stolen property. Looked like assault to me, Bell said mildly. Mrs. Boone, are you hurt? Clara accepted Miguel's hand up, one arm pressed to her ribs. I'll live. The journal, Pike said. It contains proprietary information. Bell picked it up, flipped through it. Seems to be personal observations. No company markings. Mrs. Jessup, is this yours? Billy Brennan left it to me, Martha said firmly. Then it stays with you. Bell handed it to Martha, his eyes never leaving Pike's. Mr. Pike, your men should leave. This is a military jurisdiction. Pike's jaw tightened. Captain Greer will hear about this. I'm sure he will. After Pike and his men left, Bell turned to Clara. You need those ribs examined. They're bruised, not broken. Still, his expression was carefully neutral. Miguel, escort Mrs. Boone to the infirmary, Mrs. Jessup. I apologize for the disturbance. Outside, Bell walked beside them briefly. That journal make copies. Hide them separately. Pike doesn't make the same mistake twice. That evening, Clara worked in the infirmary, cataloging supplies under guard. Her ribs ached with each breath, the soldier watching her. A young corporal named Davies seemed more bored than vigilant. Heard you stood up to Pike, he said suddenly. Foolishly. Maybe. He shifted his rifle. My sister's a teacher in Missouri. She says standing up to bullies is teaching others they can too. Before the Clara could respond, commotion erupted outside. Soldiers ran past the window. Shouts, then gunfire, distant but distinct. Davies rushed out. Clara followed, ignoring protocol. In the courtyard, soldiers were mounting horses. Captain Greer stood at the center, shouting orders. "What happened?" Clara asked Bell, who was checking his sidearm. "Attack on a settler camp, 5 miles north." He swung into his saddle. "Apache, supposedly." "Supposedly?" He looked down at her. "Camps near the Sacred Valley. Convenient timing." The soldiers thundered out. Clara stood in the dust. Martha's words echoing, "They aim to hit a camp. Make it look like Apache struck first." Miguel appeared beside her. "It's starting. We have to do something." "What? Ride after them? Tell Greer it's Pike's doing." Miguel's frustration was raw. "They won't listen." "Then we make them see." Clara pulled out the pottery shard. "Tomorrow, I'm going to Pike's office. Publicly. Make him admit what he took." "That's suicide." "No, it's standing between, like Hashke said." She looked at the leather band on her wrist. "The condition isn't just about words. It's about being seen choosing, publicly, where others can witness." An hour later, Bell's patrol returned. 3 settlers dead. Their camp burned. But Bell sought out Clara privately. "The arrows were wrong," he said quietly. "Apache arrows have 3 feathers. These had 4, and the moccasin prints too deep, like men wearing moccasins over boots. Pike's men. Can't prove it. Bodies were burned beyond recognition. Convenient." He rubbed his face, exhaustion showing. "Greer's calling for retaliation, says we ride at dawn." "Against which camp?" "Does it matter? They all look the same to him." Clara thought of the old woman, the children, Nayeli healing or dying. "It matters." "Then you better think of something before dawn, because once blood spills on both sides, real blood, this becomes war, and in war, truth is always the first casualty." Bell left her standing in the darkness. Above, stars emerged one by one, each a cold point of light in the vast indifference. Somewhere in that darkness, Hashke's people slept, not knowing that dawn would bring soldiers seeking vengeance for a crime they didn't commit. The leather band on her wrist seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. The condition, the weight, the choice to stand between. Clara made her decision. If Pike wanted war, he'd have to go through her to get it. The moon was a silver coin in the desert sky as Clara slipped from her quarters. Miguel waited with 2 horses behind the infirmary, their hooves wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Lieutenant Bell stood in shadow, rifle in hand. "This is desertion," Bell said quietly. "Greer will have you shot." "Only if we're caught," Clara replied, securing her medical bag to the saddle. "The Apache might shoot you first." "They might." She touched the leather band on her wrist.
"But I think they'll listen."
Bell stepped forward, pressed something into her hand, a military compass. "Follow the North Star until you hit Skeleton Ridge. Turn west at the Split Rock. Their scouts will find you before you find them." "Why help us?" "Because tomorrow Greer attacks the closest camp, women and children mostly. The warriors are elsewhere." His face was grim. "I've seen what happens to camps after soldiers visit. Can't stop it, but maybe you can." They rode in silence, the desert transformed by moonlight into an ocean of silver and shadow. Every sagebrush seemed a crouching figure, every rock formation awaiting ambush. The horses picked their way carefully through arroyos and over ridges, guided more by instinct than sight. "There," Miguel whispered, pointing to a flicker of light ahead. "Fire!" But as they approached, Clara realized it wasn't 1 fire but 3, arranged in a triangle, a signal. They dismounted, led the horses forward slowly. The warriors materialized from darkness, 6 of them, rifles raised. One spoke in Apache. Miguel responded in Spanish, gestured to Clara, to the band on her wrist. Long moments passed. Then one warrior lowered his rifle, spoke a single word. The others followed suit. They blindfolded Clara and Miguel, led them for what felt like hours through winding paths. When the cloths came off, they stood at the edge of a small camp tucked into a box canyon. Perhaps 30 people, mostly women, children, elderly. Hashke emerged from a shelter, no surprise on his face. "You came." "Greer rides at dawn. They'll attack the camp near Willow Springs." "We know. Our scouts saw the soldiers preparing." He studied her face. "But you didn't come just to warn us." "No." Clara pulled out the pottery shard. "I came to negotiate, real negotiation, not messages through violence." "The railroad men will not listen." "Then we make them together." She looked around the camp, saw the old woman from before watching from her shelter. "Bring your evidence, the desecrated graves, the artifacts. I'll bring mine, the journal proving Pike's crimes. We meet publicly, where witnesses can't be silenced. And if Pike refuses, then we expose him to someone he can't buy. There's a federal marshal in Prescott, Judge Thornton. He has no love for railroad corruption." Hashke was quiet for a long moment. "You ask us to trust white man's law. That has not served us well." "I'm not asking you to trust the law. I'm asking you to trust me." A young voice called out Nayeli, supported by another warrior, but standing, healing. He spoke in Apache, gesturing to Clara. Others joined in, voices rising in what sounded like debate. The old woman approached, spoke to Hashke at length. "Finally," he nodded. "My nephew says you saved him. My grandmother says you stood the test. But trust," he shook his head, "trust is earned in more than days." "Then let me earn it." Clara stepped closer. "Give me 3 days. Keep your warriors from retaliation for 3 days. Let me try to stop this without blood." "And Greer's attack tomorrow. The camp at Willow Springs, can you evacuate it tonight?" "Already done, but he'll find another target." Miguel spoke for the first time. "Not if he's chasing ghosts. I know Greer's scouts, they follow tracks like religion. We could lay false trails, lead them in circles." Hashke considered. 3 days. But if Pike's men strike again? "They won't." Clara's voice carried more certainty than she felt. "I'll make sure of it." "How?" "By giving Pike something he wants more than war." They talked through the night, planning, arguing, finding narrow ground where trust might grow. The old woman brought them pine needle tea, bitter but warming. Children peered from shelter entrances, curious about the yellow-haired woman and the quiet Mexican. As dawn approached, Hashke led them to a hidden overlook. Below, the desert stretched endless, already warming with pre-dawn light. "Your soldiers will find empty camps today," he said. "Tracks leading nowhere. It will buy time, but not much. Pike wants war. War brings profit. Not if war brings investigation. Federal investigation." Clara pulled out Billy Brennan's journal. "This proves Pike cut corners, bribed officials, caused deaths, if this reaches the right hands." "Papers." Hashke's voice was flat. "We have papers too, treaties, promises, all burned or ignored when convenient. Then we make it inconvenient to ignore." Clara turned to face him fully. "Your people, my people, we meet at Parley Flat, noon, 3 days hence. Public meeting. Bring the desecrated artifacts. Bring witnesses. I'll bring the evidence against Pike. And if soldiers come?" "They will, but so will townspeople. Journalists, if I can manage it. Too many witnesses to silence." Hashke was quiet, watching the sunrise paint the mountains red. "You stand between two peoples who would rather stand apart. This is dangerous ground." "I know. No, you begin to know." He pulled something from his pouch, another pottery shard, matching Clara's. "This was my grandmother's piece. When they join, they show a map. Sacred sites, water sources. places that must not be disturbed. Pike has this map. It's why he knows where to dig. Clara studied the shard.
Then we get it back?
From Pike's safe, impossible. Difficult, Miguel corrected. But not impossible. I shoe horses for his guards, too. Men talk when they drink. They descended back to camp as the sun climbed. The warriors had prepared their horses. Clara and Miguel would ride back alone. The Apache would shadow them unseen. Before they left, the old woman approached Clara. You love him? It wasn't a question. Clara glanced at Miguel, checking the horse's hooves.
Is it so obvious?
Love is always obvious to those who remember it. The old woman smiled. He's a good man, caught between worlds, like you. Maybe that's why you fit. The ride back was tense, expecting soldiers at every rise, but they met no one until they reached the fort's perimeter. Bell was waiting, relief clear on his face. Greer's patrol found nothing. He's furious. He helped Clara dismount. Also suspicious. You were missed. I was treating someone in town. Clara said, Mrs. Jessup can confirm. She already has. Came by an hour ago. Worried about your injured ribs from yesterday. Bell's expression was carefully neutral. Said you stayed the night, helping with her rheumatism. Clara understood Martha had provided an alibi without being asked. As they walked toward the fort, Miguel's hand brushed hers briefly. A moment's touch, but it carried weight promise. Fear, determination mixed. 3 days, he said quietly. We have 3 days to prevent a war. Then we'd better start. Clara squared her shoulders, ignoring the ache in her ribs. First, I need to see those maps in Pike's office.
That's madness.
No, Clara said, thinking of Hashke's words, of the condition that bound her. That's standing between, that's choosing the harder path because it's the right one. She looked at the leather band on her wrist, then at the fort ahead where Pike plotted and Greer raged and war gathered like storm clouds. 3 days. Everything would be decided in 3 days. Behind them, invisible in the morning heat shimmer, Apache scouts watched and waited, trusting despite history's bitter lessons, hoping despite experience. And in that space between trust and hope, between two peoples poised for war, Clara Boone prepared to make her stand. The warehouse stood at the center of town, usually storing grain and mining equipment. Today, it held the future. Clara stood at the entrance, watching people file in, townspeople, soldiers off duty, ranchers from outlying areas. Martha Jessup had done her work well, spreading word of a public meeting regarding recent disturbances. Pike sat at a table on the makeshift platform, flanked by his hired guns. Captain Greer stood stiffly in full uniform, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. He'd been furious when Clara announced the meeting, but couldn't forbid it without seeming to hide something. Quite a turnout, Edmund Pike said smoothly as Clara approached the platform. Though I fail to see the purpose. The purpose is truth, Clara replied, setting her medical bag on the table. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were the pottery shards and Billy Brennan's journal. Truth. Pike's smile was razor thin. Such a flexible concept out here. The crowd grew. Clara spotted Lieutenant Bell near the door. Several soldiers with him. Miguel stood by the side wall, watching Pike's men. Then, surprising everyone, a man in a federal marshal's badge entered. Marshal William Cord from Prescott. Martha had managed to get word to him. Ladies and gentlemen, Clara began, her voice carrying across the warehouse. 3 nights ago, settlers were killed near the Sacred Valley. We're told Apache did it, but I have evidence. Evidence, Greer interrupted. You mean Apache lies? Clara pulled out an arrow from her bag one Bell had secretly provided. 4 feathers. Apache arrows have 3. These boot prints, she unrolled a paper with charcoal impressions, show moccasins worn over boots. Apache don't wear boots. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pike stood slowly.
Speculation and sympathy for savages. Is this why you called us here?
No. Clara pulled out the journal. Billy Brennan kept records. Bribes paid. Corners cut. Deaths caused by negligence, including William Jessup's. Martha stood in the crowd.
My husband died because Pike used rotten timber. Billy wrote it all down before he was murdered.
Murdered. Pike laughed.
The man died of snakebite. In his locked room. In his bed. Strange place for a snake.
The crowd stirred uneasily. Marshal Cord stepped forward.
I'd like to see that journal.
But as Clara handed it over, one of Pike's men moved fast, grabbing for it. Miguel intercepted him, and for a moment, violence sparked. Then the warehouse door opened. Hashke entered, alone, unarmed, hands visible. The crowd gasped. Soldiers reached for weapons, but he walked calmly to the platform.
I come to speak truth, he said, his English clear and strong.
Arrest him, Greer shouted. On what charges? Marshal Cord asked mildly.
Man's unarmed in a public meeting.
Hashke pulled out a leather bundle, unwrapped it slowly. Inside were artifacts, pottery, jewelry, sacred items.
These were taken from our graves, our ancestors' rest disturbed for profit.
Prove they're yours, Pike said. Clara produced the pottery shard from her bag, then took Hashke's matching piece.
They fit perfectly, revealing part of a map. This shows sacred sites. Mr. Pike, you have the rest of this map in your office safe? How did you get it?
Pike's face darkened.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Then you won't mind if we check, Marshal Cord suggested. Not without a warrant.
Actually, a new voice said from the door, we don't need one.
Everyone turned. A small man in spectacles entered, carrying a leather case. Thomas Hartley, Federal Railroad Commission. We've been investigating irregularities in the Continental and Spurs territorial contracts. Pike went pale. This is railroad business, which falls under federal jurisdiction when it involves mail routes. Hartley opened his case, pulled out documents. We've been tracking your excavations, Mr. Pike. Selling native artifacts to museums is one thing. Deliberately desecrating graves to provoke conflict, then using that conflict to justify military protection for your railroad, that's fraud. The crowd erupted in voices. Greer stepped forward. Mr. Hartley, I don't know what you've been told, but the Apache are hostiles.
Are they?
Clara stood, pulled out more papers, military supply records Bell had provided. These show you've been drawing extra supplies for Apache defense while selling them to Pike's hired guns. That's theft, Captain. Greer's hand went to his sidearm.
You dare!
Draw that weapon and I'll arrest you myself, Marshal Cord said quietly. The tension stretched taut. Then one of Pike's hired guns made a mistake. He went for his gun. Miguel moved first, throwing his knife. It pinned the man's sleeve to the wall. Bell and his soldiers raised rifles. The crowd scrambled for cover. Enough, Hashke's voice cut through the chaos. He stood unmoved on the platform. This is what Pike wants, violence to hide truth. In the stillness that followed, Clara realized the truth of it. She pulled out the final piece of evidence, a contract she'd found hidden in Pike's trash, retrieved by Miguel the night before. Mr. Pike hired 20 gunmen 2 weeks ago, not for protection for an attack on Apache camps. Create an incident, justify military action, clear the Sacred Valley for his railroad. She handed it to Marshal Cord, who read it, his face hardening. Edmund Pike, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and incitement to violence. Pike laughed bitterly. Arrest me, I own half this territory's judges.
Territorial judges, maybe?
Cord replied. But you're dealing with a federal law now. As Cord's deputies who'd been waiting outside moved in, Pike made one last play. Captain Greer, I demand military protection. Greer looked at Pike, at the crowd, at his own men who were watching with uncertain eyes. Lieutenant Bell stepped forward. "Captain, with respect, we serve the law, not railroad money." For a moment, Greer's hand hovered near his weapon, then his shoulders sagged. "Lieutenant Bell, you're in command until further notice." He unpinned his captain's bars, set them on the table. "I'll be in my quarters, awaiting court-martial." As Pike was led away in irons, he snarled at Clara. "You think you've won, the railroad will still come? Progress doesn't stop for sentiment." "No," Clara replied. "But it can go around sacred ground. It can respect what came before." The crowd began dispersing, talking excitedly. Federal intervention, corruption exposed. War avoided, it would be the talk of the territory for months. Hashke approached Clara. "You stood between. You kept your word." "We all did." He pulled out a small leather pouch, handed it to her. "The condition is lifted, but the lesson remains standing. Between is not a moment's choice, but a lifetime's practice." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, walking out into the afternoon sun. But this time, she noticed. Several townspeople nodded to him as he passed. Small acknowledgement, but acknowledgement nonetheless. Miguel appeared at her elbow. "You did it." "We did it." "What now?" Clara looked at the leather band on her wrist. Strange how light it felt now, though it hadn't changed. "Now we build something, that medical station we talked about, serving everyone, Apache, settlers, travelers. Together." She turned to him, saw in his eyes the same mixture of hope and uncertainty she felt. Together. Marshal Cord approached. "Mrs. Boone, I'll need your testimony for the trial. But I want to say what you did here, standing up to both sides, making them see each other as human. That took courage." "It took friends," Clara corrected, looking at Martha, at Belle, at Miguel. "And it took believing that most people, given truth instead of fear, will choose right." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Clara stood with Miguel at the edge of town. In the distance, smoke rose from Apache fires, not war signals but cooking fires, ordinary life continuing. "The old woman in Hashke's camp," Clara said. "She told me something, said love is obvious to those who remember it." Miguel's hand found hers. "Wise woman." "Yes." Clara leaned into his shoulder. "She was." They stood together, watching darkness gather, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The railroad would find another route. The Apache would still fight for their land. The army would still seek purpose. But tonight, in this moment, peace held. And sometimes, Clara thought, touching the leather band that would stay on her wrist by choice now, not obligation. Sometimes a moment's peace is all you need to believe in tomorrow's possibility. Dawn came blood-red over Coyote Draw, painting the canyon walls the color of warning. Clara and Miguel stood in the narrow passage, their horses nervous behind them. They'd ridden through the night after Bell's urgent message Greer had escaped custody, joined Pike's remaining hired guns. And they were moving toward the Apache winter camp with dynamite stolen from the mining company. "They'll be slaughtered," Clara said, her breath misting in the cold morning air. "Unless we stop them here." Miguel studied the canyon walls. "This is the only way through to the camp, but 2 people against 20. 2 people trying to prevent a massacre." Clara touched the leather band on her wrist, then pulled out her medical bag. Checking supplies she prayed she wouldn't need. "We stand in the middle, make them see." The sound came first horses, many of them, moving fast, then voices, Greer's rising above the rest. "No quarter Pike may be jailed, but we finish what he started." Clara stepped into the center of the narrow passage. Miguel stood beside her, behind them, invisible among the rocks. She knew Apache scouts watched. Hashke had given his word let her try first, before blood was shed. The column of riders rounded the bend and pulled up sharp. Greer at the front, his uniform replaced by civilian clothes. his face twisted with rage and something else, desperation, perhaps, or madness. "Stand aside, Mrs. Boone." "No. We'll ride you down." "Then you'll have to—" Clara raised her voice so all could hear. "Every man here, I know your faces. Davis, your wife just had a baby. Morrison, you're sending money home to your sick mother. Brennan, you're not even Pike's man, you're just here for the pay." She looked at each one. "Is this worth it, killing women and children for a man who's already in chains?" One of the hired guns spat tobacco. "Apache killed settlers. Pike's men killed settlers. Made it look like Apache. You know this. The whole territory knows now." "Don't matter," Greer said. "Apache are enemies of civilization." "Whose civilization?" Miguel stepped forward. "The one that robs graves, that breaks treaties, that sends soldiers to slaughter camps."
Shut your mouth, half-breed!
The slur hung in the air. Miguel's hand moved to his knife, but Clara touched his arm. "Captain Greer," she said, using his former title deliberately. "You were a soldier. You took oaths, honor, duty, protection of innocence. Does any of that mean nothing now?" For a moment, something flickered in Greer's eyes. Then it hardened. "I gave 20 years to the Army, 20 years of desert posts, passed over for promotion, watching lesser men rise because they had connections. Pike offered me a future." "Pike offered you lies." "Perhaps, but at least they were profitable lies." He drew his revolver. "Last chance. Move." "No." The Mexican standoff stretched taut. Then, from the canyon walls, a voice called down Hushke, though he remained unseen. "Silas Greer, you bring death to this place, but I offer you life." Greer spun, searching the rocks.
Show yourself, savage!
"I am here. My warriors are here. You are 20. We are more, but the woman stands between us, asking for no blood. I honor her courage. Do you—"
Tricks,
Greer snarled. But several of his men were looking nervous now, scanning the canyon walls. Then Lieutenant Bell appeared at the passage entrance behind Greer's group, with a dozen soldiers. "Captain Greer, by order of the territorial governor, you're under arrest." Greer laughed bitterly. "You can't arrest us all, Bell, not before shooting starts. And once it does, your Apache friends up there will be blamed, no matter who fired first." He was right. Clara realized. Violence now would spiral beyond control, give every Indian hater in the territory excuse for retaliation. That's when she heard it singing. An old voice, cracked but strong, singing in Apache. The old woman from Hushke's camp appeared on a ledge above, clearly visible, clearly unarmed. She held something in her hands, a baby's cradle board. Other women appeared along the canyon walls, mothers with children, elderly men, all unarmed, all exposed, all vulnerable. "You want to kill Apache?" Hushke's voice carried new weight. "There they are. Shoot. Show everyone what brave men you are." The hired guns shifted uneasily. Killing warriors in battle was one thing. Shooting women holding babies while the whole territory watched that was murder, plain and visible. Clara seized the moment. Look at them. Look at their faces. That old woman, she's grandmother to 8. That young mother lost her husband to soldiers last year but raises her son without hate. Her voice grew stronger. That elder taught his grandchildren to respect all life, even as his own brothers were killed at Sand Creek. She pulled out the pottery shards from her bag, held them high. "This map shows water sources, sacred sites, places of burial going back centuries. They're not savages. They're people who've lived here longer than any of us, who know this land like we know our own names." One of the hired guns, Davis, lowered his rifle.
I didn't sign on to kill babies. Coward!
Greer spat. "No," Davis replied. "Father." He turned his horse. "I'm done." Others followed. Not all, but enough. The momentum was breaking. Greer's face contorted with fury. He swung his revolver toward Clara. Then it ends with you. 3 things happened simultaneously. Miguel's knife flew, striking Greer's gun hand. An Apache arrow sprouted from the ground at Greer's feet, a warning shot of impossible precision. And Bell's rifle cracked, the bullet striking the canyon wall inches from Greer's head. Greer's gun fell. He clutched his bleeding hand, looking around wildly. He was alone now. His hired guns scattered or surrendered.
It's over, Silas, Bell said quietly. Come peacefully.
But Greer had one more card. With his good hand, he pulled out a stick of dynamite, already fused. Then we all go together.
He lit it with a sulfur match, raised it high. The fuse sparked, hissed, burned down fast.
Clara didn't think. She lunged forward, grabbed the dynamite, and threw it with all her strength up and away from the canyon walls. It exploded in midair, the sound enormous, echoing like thunder. Rock dust rained down. In the stunned silence that followed, Greer sank to his knees. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured bladder. Bell's soldiers moved in, binding his hands. From the rocks, Apache warriors emerged slowly. Not many, perhaps a dozen, but their presence turned the canyon into a court of witness. Hashke descended last, walking directly to Clara. You stood between violence and violence. You threw death away from all of us. He looked at the assembled soldiers, hired guns. Apache. This is what courage looks like. Not the killing, but the preventing. He turned to Bell. Take your prisoners. We will not pursue. But know this, the sacred valley remains sacred. Any who disturb it will answer to us. Understood, Bell replied formally. And the army will ensure it stays undisturbed. As the soldiers led Greer and the remaining hired guns away, Hashke spoke once more to Clara. The condition I placed on you to live by truth, to stand between you, have fulfilled it beyond my hoping. The old woman had descended from the rocks, approached Clara with something in her hands, a blanket, woven with patterns that seemed to move in the morning light. For your home, she said in English, when you build it between worlds, but belonging to both. Clara's eyes burned with sudden tears. Thank you. The Apache melted back into the landscape, becoming one with rock and shadow again. But this time, Clara thought, not as enemies vanishing, but as neighbors returning home. Miguel's arm came around her shoulders. Blood from a graze she hadn't noticed marked his sleeve. You're hurt. It's nothing. He looked at her with something between admiration and exasperation. Catching dynamite with your bare hands. Someone had to. Someone. He shook his head. That someone is always you, isn't it? Lieutenant Bell approached, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Boone, the Army owes you a debt. You prevented a war. Not prevented. Postponed? Maybe. There will be other Pikes, other Greers. Yes, but there will also be other Claras, other voices calling for seeing instead of shooting. He mounted his horse. The fort needs a new medical officer. The position is yours if you want it. Clara looked at Miguel, then at the canyon where violence had been turned aside by courage and witness. Thank you, Lieutenant, but I have other plans. A medical station, neutral ground, where anyone can come for healing. Bell smiled slightly. I thought you might say that. He touched his hat brim. Good luck to you both. As the soldiers departed, Clara and Miguel stood alone in Coyote Draw. The morning sun had climbed higher, turning the red rocks gold. So, Miguel said, we build something new. Together. Together. He kissed her forehead gently. Though next time you want to catch explosives, maybe warn me first. Clara laughed, surprising herself with the sound. After everything, the fear, the tension, the narrow escape from massacre laughter seemed impossible. But here it was, rising like hope from ruins. They mounted their horses, rode toward the future they would build with their own hands, on ground between two worlds, where healing could happen and understanding might grow. Behind them, Coyote Draw stood empty, but not silent. The wind carried whispers, Apache and English and Spanish mixing together. The sound of borders becoming bridges, of endings becoming beginnings. 3 weeks had passed since Coyote Draw. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site where Clara and Miguel's medical station was taking shape. The building sat precisely on the boundary line, half on settled land, half on territory the Apache considered theirs, neutral ground, marked by treaty and witnessed by federal marshals. Clara stood in what would be the treatment room, checking supplies that had arrived from Tucson. Through the window, she could see the ceremony preparations. Today, they would return the ancestors' bones to their resting place. "They're coming," Miguel said from the doorway. Wood shavings in his hair from working on the roof beams. A procession approached from the east. Lieutenant Bell leading a small military escort, Marshal Cord, and surprisingly, Judge Thornton himself from Prescott. From the west came the Apache delegation. Hashke at the front, the old woman beside him, warriors and elders following. They met at the station, no weapons drawn, no hands on hilts, just people gathering for a solemn purpose. Pike's seized artifacts lay in wooden boxes, wrapped in white cloth. The pottery shards Clara and Hashke had carried were reunited, showing the complete map not of gold or silver deposits as Pike had hoped, but of water sources, seasonal hunting grounds, and sacred sites spanning generations. "These belong to you," Judge Thornton said formally to Hashke. "The federal government apologizes for the desecration and returns them with respect." Hashke accepted the boxes with equal formality. "We acknowledge this gesture. The dead will rest again." The procession moved to the sacred valley. Clara and Miguel were invited to follow an honor rarely given to outsiders. At the burial ground, Apache women sang mourning songs while the bones were returned to the earth. The warriors stood guard, not against enemies but as honor escorts for the ancestors coming home. When it was done, Hashke approached Clara. "The condition I placed it is finished, but I have a new one." Clara tensed slightly. "What condition?" "That you continue, that this place you build remains neutral ground, that when sickness comes and it will you treat all equally. Apache, Mexican, Anglo, no difference." "That was always the plan." "Plans change. People change. Promise me this won't." Clara looked at Miguel, who nodded. "We promise." The old woman stepped forward, placed her weathered hand on Clara's belly. Clara started she hadn't told anyone yet, had only suspected for a week. "The child will be born between worlds," the old woman said. "Teach it to walk in both." That evening, back at the station, they held a different ceremony. Martha Jessup had organized it, a dedication feast. Tables were set up outside, laden with food. Townspeople came, soldiers off duty. Even some Apache remained, though they kept to the edges. Lieutenant Bell, now Captain Bell after Greer's court-martial, raised a glass of water. The station would serve no alcohol, by mutual agreement, to neutral ground, to healing, to those brave enough to stand between. As the sun set, Clara found herself alone with Miguel on the half-finished porch. His hand found hers, rough from work but gentle in its holding. "The old woman knew," he said quietly, "about the baby. Apache women always know. That's what she told me." Clara leaned into his shoulder. "Are you ready for this, a child? A medical station? A life standing between two worlds that may never fully accept us. I was ready the moment you stood in front of 20 armed men with nothing but words and courage." He kissed her temple. "Though I still think catching dynamite was excessive." She laughed. "You'll never let me forget that, will you?" "Never." Marshal Cord approached, tipping his hat. "Mrs. Boone, Mr. Torres, wanted to let you know Pike was convicted. 20 years hard labor. His railroad contracts are void. The Sacred Valley is now federally protected land. And the new railroad route goes around, adds 40 miles and considerable expense,
But, he shrugged, some things are worth more than efficiency. After he left, they sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge. The desert night sounds began: coyotes, nightbirds, the whisper of wind through sage. A horse approached from the darkness. Hashke appeared, dismounting with his usual fluid grace. I came to say farewell. My people move to winter grounds tomorrow. Will we see you again? Clara asked. When spring comes, or if sickness comes sooner. He studied the building taking shape. This is good, what you do. But know that some of my people will never trust it. Some of yours will call you traitor for helping Apache. We know, Miguel said simply. And still you build. Still we build. Hashke nodded slowly. Then you understand the true weight of standing between, not the dramatic moments those pass, but the daily choosing, the constant balance, the endless explaining to both sides why the other deserves dignity. He pulled something from his pouch, a small leather bag on a cord. For the child to come, protection and wisdom. He hung it from a porch beam. Let it stay until the birth, then decide if you keep it. Before they could thank him, he was mounted and gone, disappearing into darkness like smoke into sky. The next morning brought challenges. A rancher arrived with a broken arm, saw the Apache medicine bag, almost left. Clara had to talk him into staying, promising his treatment wouldn't involve heathen magic. An hour later, an Apache child was brought in with fever. The mother nearly fled when she saw the rancher. This is how it will be, Clara said to Miguel as they worked side by side, setting the rancher's arm while preparing medicine for the child. Every day, suspicion, fear, old hatred. Yes, he agreed, grinding herbs the old Apache woman had taught him to use. But also this healing happening anyway. By noon, both patients were resting. The rancher watched the Apache mother sing softly to her child. When the child's fever broke, he said gruffly, "Good you helped the little one." Small words, tiny progress, but progress nonetheless. A month later, the station was complete. The sign above the door read simply, "Healing Station All Welcome." In smaller letters below, C. Boone and M. Torres, proprietors. They were married by Judge Thornton in a ceremony that reflected their standing between world's Apache blessings, Mexican traditions, American vows. The old woman attended, bringing the blanket she'd promised, now complete. Lieutenant Bell stood as witness. Martha Jessup cried through the entire ceremony. That night, as they lay in their new home attached to the station, Clara felt the baby move for the first time. She placed Miguel's hand on her belly. There, feel that. His eyes widened. Our child. Born between worlds, like the old woman said. Then we'll teach it what Hashke taught us, that standing between isn't a burden, it's a bridge. Outside, a coyote called, and others answered. The desert continued its ancient conversations, indifferent to human boundaries and conflicts. But in the healing station on neutral ground, two people who'd chosen the harder path held each other and imagined a future where bridges mattered more than walls. 6 months later, when Clara gave birth with the old Apache woman attending alongside Martha Jessup, when the baby's first cry brought tears to Miguel's eyes, when Apache and townspeople alike brought gifts to welcome the child, that's when she understood what Hashke had meant. The condition wasn't a curse or even a burden. It was a promise to live with truth, to choose understanding over fear, to stand between not as sacrifice but as bridge. Every day, every choice, every small act of healing across dividing lines. The leather band remained on Clara's wrist, no longer bound by promise, but worn by choice. A reminder that some conditions, once accepted, become not weight but wings, not haunting but guiding, not ending but beginning. As she held her daughter Maria Song of Two Worlds Torres, they would call her Clara looked through the window at the desert stretching endless under stars. Somewhere out there, Hashke's people traveled their ancient paths. Somewhere, trains carried settlers to new futures. Somewhere, violence still threatened. But here,
In this place, between places, healing happened, understanding grew, and a child born of two worlds would learn to walk in both, carrying forward the lesson of the condition that standing between isn't standing apart, but standing for something greater, the hope that different peoples might someday see each other not as other but as human. The condition would haunt them forever. Hashke had said he was right, but some hauntings are blessings in disguise, and some conditions, once accepted, set you free. Thank you for listening to this Wild West story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive through your own desert landscapes. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reflections make these tales come alive in new ways. Until our next adventure together, keep riding toward those distant horizons.